All right, I'm going to call to order this regular meeting of the Public Safety, Civil Rights, and Emergency Management Committee meeting today. It is November 5th, 2014, the day after the elections. I am Councilmember Blong Yang, chair of this committee. With me today are council members Palmisano, Gordon, and Warsame. We will not have Councilmember Reich today because he has a prior engagement, and Council President Johnson is sick today. So we have 5 items on our agenda for today. The first 2 items are consent items, and let me point out consent item number 1 is the appointment of the Minneapolis Commission on Civil Rights, Police Conduct Oversight Commission, and Police Conduct Review Panel, and these will be set for a public hearing on November 19, 2014 at 1:30 p.m. to consider the mayoral and city council appointments of the following: Minneapolis Commission on Civil Rights, Police Conduct Oversight Commission, and Police Conduct Review Panel. The second item is to authorize an extension for 1 year of a contract with Corner House Interagency Child Abuse Evaluation and Training Center for forensic interview services of children and vulnerable adults, and increasing the contract to $155,607, an increase of 1.5%, and to authorize execution of documents necessary to effectuate the agreement. And this will be referred to Ways and Means. The third item, which is, we have 3 discussion items. And the third item is a report for us to receive an annual domestic violence update report from the city attorney's office. The fourth item is receiving an update on the quarterly reports from the Civil Rights Department, and also to have community member or members, give a presentation. The fifth item is to receive an update on the police department's body cam policy. And council members, if you don't mind, I'm going to move item number 5 of the discussion to be the first item on the discussion agenda. Okay. All right. So with the consent items, anyone want to pull anything off for discussion? Okay. Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor of the consent items, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right. Motion carries. All right, so the first item on our discussion agenda is receiving an update on the police department's body camera policy. And would that be Chief? Okay, Chief. And I just wanted to give a little background on this. There was a story Sunday on KSTP as to the body camera program, the pilot being rolled out this week. I believe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday were training days, and we were going to release the SOPs out for community review, and then on Friday the program was going to be, or the pilot was going to happen. And a couple of days ago, Council President and I were talking with the mayor about this, and she had told us that it would be entirely appropriate to call in the police department, this committee, to give us an update on what was happening, because as you all might remember with that story, at least on the council side, we didn't know what was going on, and so here you are. So thank you for being here. And I know you had a busy schedule today, and I really appreciate you making the time to be here and giving us an update on this pilot. And here you go.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also with me is Deputy Chief Glampy, who's been instrumental in the pilot. So just by way of background, certainly from the beginning, I've been a proponent and have looked into the use and implementation of the personal body cameras since I became chief. I believe the equipment will provide an added layer of transparency and accountability to the department. In addition, this technology will protect our officers from false and frivolous claims, saving time and money in the process. I know you had questions about process. So there have been lots of back and forth working with the SOP, and the plan has remained the same with a Friday kickoff. Our officers are in training, and this SOP, the standard operating procedure for all of you, is it's a fluid document, and that's why I've from the beginning wanted to caution people that this continues to change. Now it's being released to the public today. You will all have it If you don't already have it, it's posted on our website. PCOC has it. We're looking for feedback from them. Now that the public has it, we'll be looking for feedback from them as well. We've also made a couple of changes as early as Monday and Tuesday with officers that are involved in the pilot project. That was one of the purposes of the pilot to begin with. Did you have any additional questions on that part?
Chief, with regards to, releasing the SOPs today, my understanding of it is that, we're releasing it so that the public and the council and other folks, have a chance for feedback. And my question to you is, with regards to that feedback, are the SOPs going to stay the same for at least the next 6 months, and then we'll change it afterwards in terms of, gathering the feedback and then changing the SOPs afterwards, or is it going to be a fluid, SOP where things are going to change just, with feedback? We're going to just like troubleshoot every single area along the way. And so within that 6 month period, there'll be constant change.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to let Deputy Chief Glampy answer that question.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, committee members, the plan is to make necessary operational changes as we go along. If it's a cosmetic change, no, that's something we can hold in reserve until we come out with our permanent policy sometime next year after the pilot project. The one thing we want to caution is even after our training yesterday, we came out with a number of items that need to be added. And I will be absolutely shocked if after the first day of implementation on the street on Friday, if our officers don't come back to us with some really good ideas for change. With that being said, we also have to be cautious with overloading our officers with changes. If we throw something new at them every day, that will not be healthy for them. So we want to limit the number of times we change this. Obviously, if there's anything critical that needs to be changed, we're going to do that right away. But for the most part, the SOP and the pilot project are put in place to gain that feedback from everybody involved, including the officers. So if something is or isn't working, that's what we're going to take into account as we make the changes. If it's something that really needs to be done to continue the program on the right track, we're going to do that. Otherwise, we will hold things in reserve until we go with the overall permanent policy next fall.
And, with regards to the training, all 36 officers that volunteered, they're the ones getting trained, right? We're not training other officers as well, right?
Mr. Chair, not at this time. So everybody that's participating in the pilot project has volunteered. And I will tell you that the officers across the board are looking forward to using the equipment. It helps them do their jobs much better. It prevents from frivolous accusations and helps us build public trust.
Okay. And, with the officers that are volunteering, they're working in different shifts, though, right? It's not folks from the first, third, and fourth that are, working the mid-watch. Folks are working the day shift, mid-watch, and other different shifts altogether. So, we're going to get kind of a good cross-section of, the shifts and just the type of action that happens in the city, right?
Absolutely. Mr. Chair, absolutely. We purposely made it the first, fourth, and fifth precincts, and we purposely split them up evenly amongst day watch, mid-watch, and dog watch for the same reasons you just alluded to. Every shift, every precinct has a different flavor, so we wanted to make sure we were able to pull as much feedback from the different slices across the city that we could.
Okay, and I apologize about that. I'm mistaken. First, fourth, and fifth. Got it.
Correct.
Okay, let's make it clear to the public about that. Please go ahead with your presentation.
Okay. And I just wanted to be clear that because we weren't the first city and department to have body cameras, this is one of the reasons why we took some time to look at best practices. The Police Executive Research Forum released their manual on how to implement based on lessons learned that other departments had. So a lot of work went into it. So although we anticipate some changes that certainly will adjust to our department, there's many things that we already know works. And that's the foundation of this SOP you have today. We've also used other departments like Duluth and Burnsville who have had the body cameras as well. So we've looked at local places for it. So you have the SOP. Have you had an opportunity to look at that? Do you want to ask questions on that today? I'm not quite sure exactly how much you want.
Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. I have a couple questions on it, although I haven't had a lot of time to review it all. I would say that one of the things that I want to see us err on is the side of actually activating it and recording it. There's been instances even when squad cameras weren't working, or security cameras in this very building for some reason weren't capturing video or audio. And I noticed one thing says there's a restriction that officers shall not use it for SWAT-related operations. And what is the reasoning behind that?
And that's a best practice. I'll let Deputy Chief Glampy respond.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon. Number one, we only have one as a member of the volunteer SWAT team is, it's not a full-time SWAT team. Officers, while they're always SWAT members, they're also assigned to shifts on the city. So we only have one person who is assigned a body camera, volunteered, who happens to be a SWAT member. Having not trained all the SWAT members, it would not be practical during this process, this test, to have SWAT utilize the cameras. That was only put in place specifically for the pilot project. That is, and I think one of the reasons we put it in is we mean to address it when we go with the full policy implementation. So not only is it in there because we don't have anybody but that one officer, but it's also meant to be a bookmark, I think, internally for us to know that we want to address that. Because what we're finding is there are some best practices that haven't been addressed across the country. I've ran into a couple already. And so it's we're going to have that opportunity to help address not only us, but everybody else with those best practices.
Well, I appreciate that because just from my perspective, I could see how in some SWAT operations it could be very useful. I also had another question about when it should be activated. And it says officers shall manually activate the PVR to record mode when reasonably safe and practical in the following situations. And then there's a long list of situations. And I'm wondering when it wouldn't be reasonably safe and practical to turn them on at a traffic stop or priority response, or when you're in an arrest situation. It seems like that could potentially create this loophole where someone will say it wasn't practical for me to turn it on. It was my hands were full or something. So when might it be dangerous and impractical to turn it on?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, what we're trying to instill in the officers is best discretion. And that's part of the pilot project. And we never want them to compromise officer safety. We never want them to be in a situation where they're in danger and then have to look down and worry about activating their camera first and foremost. We want them to be safe. We want them to take care of the public and make them safe first and foremost. What we intend to do and what we will see through training is to get that to be automatic within the officers. But for the purposes of the pilot project, whenever that situation would arise where it wouldn't be safe or practical to do so, we want to give them the discretion. On the other hand, there's a piece of ownership to that. If you don't activate your camera when you should, you have to provide the explanation, either in a written report or otherwise, why you didn't activate it. So while there is, in fact, a loophole in these policies, just like there is with our mobile video in our squad cars, we are trusting that the officers use their best discretion, and they'll have to provide that explanation when it doesn't get operated properly.
And I think that's going to be one of the interesting things to see in the pilot, and also when it gets deactivated, because the other thing we don't want to happen is raise suspicions about why did you deactivate it early, and all of a sudden we got a complaint filed during that, while you were still with the individual involved in that scene, and we don't have what we think could be the good evidence that would tell us exactly what happened. So hopefully we'll be tracking that. We'll be looking at when each instance was activated, when it was deactivated, and if there's any questions kind of outside that, and it will be interesting to see. And hopefully that we'll find the practices. It gets activated often and regularly, and it's not turned off till an incident is over.
And Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon, just to add, the expectation is those cameras are used. That will be the expectation. But there are times where it's a necessity to have the cameras off, and that's part of that pilot as well. So it's about discretion, but we will do a very thorough look as to when those cameras are on and when they're off.
Chief, let me just ask this question of the both of you. When an officer or officers, have a body camera, Will, let's say, or potential perp know that the camera's turned on? I mean, is there like a beeping red, indicator or something like that that will, indicate that it's on, or is it pretty just seamless? Nobody will know.
Mr. Chair, there are indicators that the camera is running. At this point, I would rather not discuss those in public for, tactical reasons. But certainly, I think what's important for the officer, there are indications that will let them know that the camera's on too, so it's not a guessing game that I turn it on or off. And that's one of the things we looked at with the product is, what signal do they have when you turn it on that in fact is operating? Because it's not like the squad video where you can look up and actually see it running before you get out of the squad. So yes, there are indications.
And Mr. Chair, I would just add, just as the explanation for the officers, they should assume they're being recorded all the time in every interaction because everybody has a cell phone. There's video cameras everywhere. I would say the general public should feel that most interactions with the police department will now be recorded as well.
Council members, any other questions? I have one last question. So in this situation, I mean, I'm just wondering, I mean, this process wasn't completely in secrecy, but I mean, I'm wondering why the council didn't know about what was happening. And, I know that we've had DC Glampy here in committee a few times, but I mean, I don't recall, the exact date when, we're going to roll things out or, when SOPs were going to be released or any of that stuff. And, I think what I sometimes find problematic is that when stuff like this happens, I mean, I think as a committee, we need to know.
Mr. Chair and Council, this has been rapidly moving. I'm a little challenged with what exactly you didn't know outside of the exact date. We did publish the date of the press conference and when things would be made available. The committee is made up of, if you don't know, by way of background, and we had members of not just the MPD, our crime lab, records, the union, the Federation has been a great partner along the way, leadership and organizational development division, our administrative division, internal affairs, city attorney, county attorney, a business technology unit, and of course the mayor's office has been closely working with us as well.
Okay, but I mean, you listed that whole group. I didn't hear the council being a part of that at all.
No.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Palmisano.
Mr. Chair, Chief Arto, could you speak generally about what kinds of specific metrics you'll be taking from this pilot in regards to, a future rollout? Like will they be qualitative? Will they be quantitative? Could you just speak to that a little bit?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, I'm not sure if I know exactly. We're not deciding if we're going to utilize the cameras or not. It's the best way to implement the cameras, when to have them on and off, and procedural. So that's what we'll be looking at during the pilot. And then also what type of camera fits us best, weather conditions, where we wear them, which company, those kinds of things.
Mr. Chair, Chief Harto, yep, I understand that. Will it be more self-reported, or will there be some kind of back-end analysis as to this has been working, this hasn't been working?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, this is going to be largely in part self-reported by the officers. They're going to be given a series of surveys that ask questions all the way from tell us how you thought the camera functioned to do you think your behavior changed as a result of the camera. Those are the it's going to have to be self-reporting because there's not a lot of computer analysis that we can do to get information back as to show us what works better. It's really a lot of subjective things that we are going to have to look at.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. So I just have a question maybe about, or want to talk a little bit maybe about how we could better connect the council committee just the chair's question about feeling maybe out of the loop on this, and then you listed some group that were serving in an advisory kind of capacity, I think, to developing the policies. And it occurred to me, well, maybe there should be a spot for a council aide or something like that. Is that group going to continue meeting and reviewing the policy in the future and continuing working on that? And is that an opportunity where we could have a better connection from the council to this work?
No, we don't. We will be meeting.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, I think that's a great idea. I'm happy to, we want to do frequent updates or however you see the best way to get information. If we want one council member or an aide assigned to the committee that is in charge of relaying back information, I think that's certainly feasible. If you want reports to this committee, I'm happy to have one of us do that at appropriate intervals. We have a 6-month pilot. What does that look like? Do we want 3 months? You tell me.
Well, and that was my other, Mr. Chair, was to talk about maybe when we want to hear the results of the pilot. So I was thinking at the end, but maybe a mid-round 3-month check-in makes some sense. Since you offered that, it might be a good move in the direction of better connection to all of this important work.
Any other, Councilmember Palmisano? Any other questions, council members? All right, seeing none. Madam Clerk, should we make a motion for receive and file on this?
Oh, you should, and if there's any further direction, you would want to vote on that as well.
Okay. Anything else, Ted? Okay, well, hearing none, I will just move to receive and file this report. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you. Thank you. The second discussion item is from the City Attorney's Office, and it's the City of Minneapolis's pledge to reduce domestic violence and work plan, and this will be us receiving the annual domestic violence update report from City Attorney Susan Siegel.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thanks for taking the time out to let us give you our annual update. Back in 2007, the City Council adopted a pledge to reduce domestic violence in the city of Minneapolis. And we are continuing to make significant progress in this front, not only our office, but in partnership with the Minneapolis Police Department, our advocate partners, the Domestic Abuse Project, MinCasa, and Asian Women United. And we have developed since 2007 what we call the Minneapolis model. And we've made significant progress. We continue to make this a significant priority for our office, and it's also a priority for our city. So just a quick overview of what is the Minneapolis model. We have a specialized team. We use evidence-based prosecution, so we have a team of prosecutors, victim witness assistants, and advocates dedicated to prosecuting misdemeanor and gross misdemeanor domestic violence. As I mentioned, we've got a partnership with the advocacy community, and there's also a Minneapolis misdemeanor domestic violence court, a specialized court in Hennepin County. We've had a little bit of a challenge with all of the turnover of judges in the last year or so in having some continuity on that bench. I think that's been a challenge for us as well as the bench. So, but we are working with them on that so we can have greater continuity there. New initiatives that you'll hear about real briefly are, we did get another Federal Violence Against Women Act grant, and Michelle Jacobson and Carol Arthur are here to talk about some of the progress we've made under that grant. We also have asked for, and the mayor included in her recommended budget for 2015, some funding to develop a pilot program on violent crime hotspots, because the #1 call for service, 911 call for service in those hotspots is for domestic violence. And so we're working with the Public Health Department, our office, and again, Domestic Abuse Project to develop a pilot. We are going to be doing some community engagement over the next couple of months to help us design that pilot. The other exciting thing is that the Minneapolis Police Department applied for and received a Byrne Competitive Justice Initiative grant to specifically do some research around violent crime hotspots, the impact of violence, particularly on youth, and of domestic violence. And so we're going to be able to wrap that work in as well. I also reached out to the Humphrey School, and they're going to be doing capstone research projects. I think seriatim, 2 of them, one to design the evaluation, and then the next group of students will actually do the evaluation work, because we wanted some evidence to help us know whether our work is being effective. Are we, in fact, by intervening aggressively at the misdemeanor, gross misdemeanor level, are we preventing escalation? Are we turning around behavior and really making a long-term difference for the victims? So then the other thing I do want to say is that Carol Arthur, who's been just a hero in the domestic violence community and has led the Domestic Abuse Project for over 20 years, is retiring at the end of this year. And so we will be doing a resolution in her honor at the next city council meeting. So this will be the last annual update where she will be here in her capacity as executive director, but I know that she will still be engaged in this work, however, perhaps with a little more time for her grandchild. So anyway, so this is Michelle Jacobson, who's the Cracker Jack supervisor of our domestic violence team.
Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about some quick facts. So one of the things is we are seeing a slight reduction in domestic violence 911 calls this year. Through June 30th, there were 8,159 DV-related 911 calls. If that trend continues, that'll be about a 7% decrease over 2013. The number of arrests and gone on arrival police reports have remained pretty much steady in 2013 and 2014, and our conviction rate for this year, as of September 30th, is at 68%, which is a little bit less than our high point. I think 73% was the highest point we ever got to, but certainly a lot higher than when we started doing some of the work we did with the police department. I think we were at about 35% about 6 years ago, or 7 years ago. So we have increased our conviction rate significantly. So what have we been doing? Well, one of the big things is, Susan talked about the Minneapolis model. It's really about coordinating within the city and with our community partners, both with the police department. We've worked now with the health department, and then our court-based partners as well. One of the other things that we've really worked on this year is really to increase our outreach and training, which we provide for our partners. For example, we sponsor an advocate update that we did in April of this year, where we invited community-based advocates and other system players to learn about domestic violence. We've worked with DAP to training for the Fathers Project about domestic violence. We did trainings with Corner House, Hennepin County MFIP workers. We did a training about the intersection of domestic violence and mental health for the Hennepin County Mental Health Roundtable, so we worked with a lot of caseworkers there. We did training for the county attorney's office and their law clerks. We do training for all the new judges about domestic violence in Hennepin County, and then we did training for probation as well. We also continue to work with our officers and our partners at MPD. So far this year, we've done 6 sessions of training for new recruits, both for MPD, Metro Transit, and State Patrol. And we already have one more training set for November for MPD, and State Patrol has already contacted us to set up the training for next year for their recruit class. We also had a recap training about the domestic violence protocol for all officers at their in-service. And actually right now we're training all the investigators about the new domestic violence related gun laws. And we did training for 911 operators and dispatchers as well this year. In 2008, we first rolled out the misdemeanor domestic violence patrol officer response. That was, like I said, in 2008. It was adopted as official policy by MPD in 2012, and it's going to be expanded this year to include all offenses that are domestic violence related, so even the felony level offenses. We're changing our victim supplements to include more questions about firearms possession due to some new laws. We're going to distribute new cards to officers. We're going to reprint them. This is their domestic protocol, and they'll all get a new card sometime at the end of this year or the beginning of next year. And we also also will be highlighting the new 72-hour arrest period for misdemeanors so that officers are aware of this change in the law as of August 1st. If someone flees the scene of a domestic, it used to be 12 hours, then it became 24 hours that you could arrest them. Now it's 72 hours. And so we're making sure we share that information with victims and others. One of the other big things we've been working on is coordinating our efforts regarding the new firearms laws. We've been working with the courts, the county attorney's office, and MPD to plan our implementation of those new laws and helping district court develop the new forms. We also have the state VAWA grant that we've received. VAWA is Violence Against Women's Act, to enforce domestic abuse no contact orders and investigate in-progress domestic cases. We partner with DAP on that program, as well as Casa de Esperanza and Asian Women United, and our hope is to increase services for victims and have fewer, and there have been fewer violations of the no contact orders, I think because word is getting out that we're checking. Susan talked very briefly about our new federal VAWA grant. We received a 3-year grant to focus on the investigation of misdemeanor and gross misdemeanor gone on arrival cases. Partners in that project include the police department, the city attorney's office, the county attorney's office, Domestic Abuse Project CASA, and Asian Women United. With grant funding, we were able to hire an investigator to do investigation on these misdemeanor and gross misdemeanor cases, and they pair up with an advocate to go out and talk to the victim and offer services. And this is a really big step forward because previously the police department didn't do any follow-up investigation on those cases. The grant goals, I won't read each of them, but really we were hoping to increase the number of cases and decrease the time it took us to do that. And in the first 6 months of the grant, I think we were able to do that. So in the first 6 months, we assigned almost nearly as many cases as we did all of last year. We increased the number of cases charged by 220%. We decreased the amount of time it took for us to review the case to charge it by 52%. We decreased the time from case charging to case resolution by 53%. And again, overall, from the time we first reviewed it, we decreased that to case resolution by 49%. Our conviction rate has also increased on those cases. It was 81% last year. It's 87% as of the middle of this year. So I'm going to do a case study from the grant because I thought that would be kind of an interesting way to put this more in perspective. And I'm just going to pull out this binder because these are all the police reports related to AW. He is a 38-year-old male. He has been named in 67 Minneapolis police reports. The first report was when he was 15 years old. The reports range from everything from driving violations, narcotics, robbery, and domestic assault. He's alleged to be a gang member. He is a convicted drug dealer, including serving a 10-year federal prison sentence for selling drugs. 4 different order for protection or HROs have been filed against him, and 8 prior domestic assault police reports were filed by his previous girlfriend. Only 2 of those cases were charged, both of which were dismissed. Then we started getting this new grant, and so there had been 8 police reports filed from November of 2013 through February 23rd of 2014 involving his girlfriend TJ. The reports included allegations of domestic assault, damage to property, robbery, and violations of her no-contact order. In all the reports, he was gone before police arrived, and no cases were charged or even investigated until the GOA grant investigator was assigned to one of these cases. And so that investigator's name is Darcy Horn. She's a sergeant in the Minneapolis Police Department. She went to the victim's work with the advocate. They were able to visit with her. They found new witnesses. From those 8 police reports, they charged 2 cases, a gross misdemeanor violation of an order for protection, and a felony complaint charging him with second-degree assault, simple robbery, stalking, and terroristic threats. After a trial, he was convicted of stalking and terroristic threats and sentenced to 43 months in prison. Just talking a little bit more about domestic violence as well, when we were looking up the police reports revolving AW, we also noticed that his mother had been listed as the victim in 9 domestic violence police reports, and that his mother was also arrested one time for assaulting her boyfriend with a knife. We could not find any information about his father, But we also noted that criminal justice and police intervention is often cyclical in families, and the fact that his 15-year-old son is listed in police reports 11 times since he was 5 years old, and from the ages of 12 to 13, he was arrested or cited for a crime 7 times. And there haven't been any reports since September of 2013, so I'm not sure what's happened with him now. But the one positive I would say is even though there has been lots of police intervention with him, there have been no reports filed involving him in domestic violence in a domestic violence offense. So what are we going to do in 2015? Susan talked very briefly about the violent crime hotspots. We have applied for another state grant to fund police and advocacy response where in 911 calls where no police report is generated. Sometimes by the time the police get there, the people are gone and there's no advocacy or police response. And so we're hoping to increase community engagement both within the police and with the advocates by doing some follow-up on those cases. We also have an ongoing work group meeting to discuss how to address domestic violence in the crime hotspots, both with the police department, the city attorney's office, the health department, and the domestic abuse project. And as Susan said, we will also interact with that hotspots grant that the police department received. So any questions for me or any of our partners, actually? Oh, and I see Deputy Chief Arneson is here now, too. I have to thank her because she has been a huge supporter of all of our domestic violence-related offenses, and I don't think we could be here talking about our successes if it weren't for her as well.
Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much, and appreciate the report and the good work, and it's great to see such a dramatic increase in the convictions. I think that's significant. It does make me worry a little bit about what we're going to do when the grant money is gone and we don't have the extra investigations going on. I had one little question about the reduction in the 911 calls. I think it's easy to think that's must be a good thing, and that might mean that there's fewer incidents of domestic violence, but we've also seen the population grow in the city, and it's been growing. So it also worries that we might return to the days when almost nobody seemed to, if they ever existed, but you probably understand what I'm saying, when it was much less likely that anyone would actually call 911 and they would just kind of try to deal with this themselves. I suspect there are other indicators that, well, for example, the number of people that call a shelter or looking for a way out or contact somebody else that would tell us if the incidence is going down or not. But do you think the fact that there's fewer 911 calls means that there might actually be a decrease in incidents of domestic violence?
Well, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, it's hard to say for sure because it is true that many people don't report. The Office of Justice Programs has done a crime victim survey, and they do tend to show that the number of unreported incidents has stayed the same. And Carol, am I correct on that? I think one of the things that we have noticed, though, is that we're seeing reports more frequently from new people or different people. And so it's not, I think one of the reasons why the calls were so high before is we might have 10 or 15 calls before a conviction was obtained and a person was placed onto probation and into programming. Now it's much more common for when we're looking at an offender or a victim that we don't see as long of a prior pattern. So I think that does add to the decrease in the calls. And we have been working with our partners. You know, that's why we partner with Asian Women United, CASA, and Domestic Abuse Project, because they are doing outreach within the communities and the newer populations in Minneapolis about the need and the importance of calling for help when they need it. So you can never tell for sure, but I think the indicators seem to exist that we are seeing some successes, and there are actually hopefully fewer instances of domestic violence than there were in the past.
Well, that's interesting, and that does sound hopeful. And if there was lots of repeat 911 calls with involving the same person, and now we're actually getting a conviction, so we're taking somebody out of the situation and creating a safer home, that could be significant. And I'd like to think maybe that's one reason why we've seen the reduction. So I'll just think that for a little while anyway, and I appreciate that. My other question is, what are we going to do when Carol Arthur retires and isn't leading us in these efforts? It's been so incredible, and it's such a career that she's dedicated to this work and this effort.
Well, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, I think one of the greatest things about Carol, and I've worked with her very closely over the years, is that she has a very strong agency that she has in place, and she has great members of her leadership team there. And I think that when they will continue to bring the domestic abuse project to the forefront, it's going to be hard to replace Carol. I don't know if anyone will ever be able to, but I do believe that she has put a good leadership team in place there, and that we will still have a great partnership with the domestic abuse project, and they will continue to be one of the leading innovators in domestic violence work in the city and even the whole country.
Thank you.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Jacobson, I'm hugely appreciative of this work and also the work of the Domestic Abuse Project, which is part of it. I've learned about that here in my first year in office and at the luncheon to honor Carol a couple weeks ago. One thing I struggle with and I'm not sure of is outside of the protocol that you've mentioned here, how can neighbors and council members, I'm in a situation here myself, and other concerned people connect into these kinds of services? Because it is something that often neighbors will see or have seen for so long. And I know that one of the big strengths of the Domestic Abuse Project is the great number of advocates. How do we as community members or as elected officials seek to put those two together to better align some of our services within in our communities based on situations that we see day to day?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, I think the really important thing is just to keep getting the message out there, and that's one of the reasons why we've tried to do so much outreach with people like MFIT workers and child support workers and mental health workers, and I think the public as well. And it's just really making people aware of the fact of what are warning signs of domestic violence and what are the resources in the community to address them. Because ideally, no one should have to come to court to address domestic violence. It would be better if it could be addressed even before the police or the prosecutors intervened. But unfortunately, that is sometimes the only way we can make these changes. And so I think it's really just continuing to increase public awareness. That's one of the reasons why we want to come here every year. And also then just increase outreach. And we've started to now partner with the health department, which I think will be a great partnership because they are in places that the city attorney does not go to or the police don't go to as well.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if I may, one more question. So what is when you say community members can reach out? So I send them a link, they go to your website. How do they reach out for their next door neighbor, for example?
So, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, I think the really important way is it's the personal touch to the neighbor. It's, maybe you reach out to the Domestic Abuse Project and say, hey, I've noticed this going on in my neighborhood. How can I intervene or what can I do to support her to address it? And then making sure that they're aware of the resources there as well. Does that answer your question?
For now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, council members, any other questions? All right, hearing none. Does anyone want to add anything else to this? All right, well, I will move to receive and file this report. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Jacobson. Thank you to the City Attorney's Office. Thank you to the MPD. And Ms. Arthur, thank you so much for all the work that you've done on this issue. Yeah. All right, our last item on the agenda is receiving an update on quarterly reports. And, we're going to start with Ms. Corbel to give us the report. But after that, we will have Avi Viswanathan come up to the podium and give his, wouldn't want to call it a rebuttal, but his presentation on the report, and we'll just kind of go from there. But this isn't a situation where it's going to be somebody's going to give a presentation and somebody's going to give a rebuttal. It's more so just going to be informational all the way through. And so, Ms. Corbel, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Velma Corbel. I'm the director in the Minneapolis Department of Civil Rights. And I'm here today to give you an overview of the first half of the year 2014 activity in our second quarter report. I would just note that the report period covers January 1st through June 30th of 2014. And for those who might be curious, the third quarter for 2014 is actually complete. The snapshot date was September 30th, but there is some lag time in completing a report. It takes about 14 to 21 days to get all the payrolls in from all the contractors. Then it also takes time for contract compliance staff in the department to close the projects in order to be able to present you with data on the closed projects. So I would just inform the committee that the third quarter report will probably be coming up relatively quickly to this report. You have the report in your packet of information, but I would just call your attention to some of the numbers as of the first and second quarters. We are looking at, in terms of the small business inclusion numbers, about $183 million worth of contract dollars monitored. The minority business inclusion number is $14 million, which is about close to 8%, 7.78%. The women business inclusion is about $24.5 million, or 13.41%, close to $40 million in total MBE, WBE inclusion in the first half of the year, or $38.8 million. The city of Minneapolis passed an aspirational goal of 25% for women and minority business inclusion back in 2012. I believe it was in the spring of 2012. And so you'll note here that of that aspirational 25% goal, we're at about 21.19%. For the workforce inclusion, we are computing the numbers on a little over 1 million hours worked for the first 6 months. Minority hours, 199,000 of 18.95%. Female hours, about 60,000 for 5.73%. You'll notice that this goal set by the state of Minnesota Human Rights Department, adopted by the city of Minneapolis in the spring of 2012, the minority number is 32%, the female number is about 6%, so we are lagging both the minority number significantly, and the female number is probably the closest that we've ever been to meeting the goal on that number in many years. But I'd also mention to you that the 8.95% number on the 32% is actually much better than where the city was at the same time last year. So I will just let you know that in 2013, in the first half of the year, the minority business enterprise number, the city was sitting at about 3.3%. And that has improved, certainly not to the place where we'd like it to be, but certainly significant improvement from 3.3 to 7.7. That is a significant difference in the amount of resources going into the community when we talk about the number of employees this affects, the number of businesses it affects. And the women business enterprise number at the same time in 2013 was at 4.78, a little under 5%. And so that 13.41 number, again, is a significant improvement over where the city was at the same time last year. I would also just note that on the workforce inclusion numbers as well, the same time last year, 2013, the city was at 16.2%, and now we're at approximately 19, or the 8.95. Same time last year for female, 5.3%, and now at 5.7. So when you look at the workforce numbers, if you average this number out to about 2,000 hours per employee, on minority employees in 2013, that's about 16 employees, less than 20 employees. And in 2014, that's 100 employees working on city projects. And in terms of the female number, 5.3% at that time in 2013 was about 5 employees. And that same same period in 2014, about 30 employees. Now, what I can't tell you is if these are actually different employees project to project. There could be some of the same employees working on these city projects, but I can tell you that the economic impact in terms of the number of FTEs has improved significantly over time. One of the other things that I would call the committee's attention to is work that the city is currently undertaking to try to make it easier for us to plan, monitor, track, and report on our women, minority inclusion, whether it's business or workforce. And we're currently in the process of working with the city's finance department and the city's IT department to acquire some technology that's going to make it easier for us to do these reports in the future. But I do just want to call your attention again to the dollar amount of the inclusion on these projects. So when you go from the minority number, for example, in 2013 is about $1 million, $1.2 million, to a $14 million number when you look at the percentage based on the total contract amount that's being monitored by the Civil Rights Department. That is a significant increase and I think an enhancement of the economy in Minneapolis. Is it where we want to be? If you look at our aspirational goal, it isn't. But I think we have some good strategies in place, and we're doing, I think, as well as can be expected, especially in the workforce, where we still are challenged by identifying women and minorities in the specialty trades. And those are, of course, the electricians, fitters, plumbers. And so we still are challenged in that regard as well. But I don't think there's a contractor you can talk to in the city or in the region that doesn't have that issue. And so we have, I think, some plans in place. But that is what I have in terms of reporting, and I would entertain any questions that the committee might have at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Corbel. Quick question before I call on the other council members. So this is a first half report, and when was this report released?
When was it released?
Yes.
It was put up on our website last week when the report was actually completed.
Okay, so, using your timeline earlier, why is it about 2 months late?
As I mentioned earlier, there is lag time to getting payrolls in, to doing the analysis, but also working in our own contract compliance department to close out the projects for that quarter in order to be able to put the report together.
Right, but when I do the math on what your lag time is, it still is a little bit late, and I'm just wondering if we can get on time or get on track with this. But Councilmember Palmisano, you had your, okay, Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much, and it is good to see this. I think I was used to seeing quarterly reports, and so it's been a while this year, so it's good to see this coming in. It's too bad that maybe we aren't closer to accomplishing our goals. I just had a question about a specific, sort of as an example. So I'm looking on page 3, and I'm looking at the 10th closed out project there. It's a PPL foreclosure 2. Flannery Construction did it. It was over $1 million. Almost $2 million, and they had 0% minority and 0% women. And in those situations, what do we do? And I don't know if we want to talk specifically what we've done with Flannery, but I know in the past there's been, seems like kind of a gray area of the good faith effort. And I do notice that part of the report says we've created a checklist for actually what is a good faith effort and all of that. But do they get a warning letter, and kind of what are the steps then to say at some point you're not getting any more business from the city? At this time, you're suspended. I know in my time here, and I've been one of the long-termers up here, I guess, we've done it to one company that we actually suspended for a while. So maybe if you have specifics about Flannery, That's good. I actually think it's nice when we have reports like this that are public knowledge so other people can kind of look at the companies that are doing well and the ones that aren't. But
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon, I don't have specific information about Flannery, but I can tell you in general what happens in a situation like this. When we identify whether or not there are subcontracting opportunities in a project and set a goal on it, what we ask is that the individuals responding to the contract either meet the goal or identify the activities that they've undertaken to get to the goal. And so we are, there's a rigorous review of a contractor's good faith efforts to get there. But keep in mind that the goal is also set based on where we believe there are businesses ready, willing, and able to actually be engaged in this work. And so there are some companies that can go through the good faith efforts activities, and they do make a concerted effort to go out and identify and solicit to businesses in which to do business on the activities that we've identified for subcontracting. And if they can present a strong case for the activities that they've undergone, we will indicate that they have performed a good faith effort. The law is pretty clear that if a company is undertaking efforts to achieve the goal, or if a company achieves the goal, we can't say you can't do business in the city even though you've undertaken all the activities that have been identified to meet the goal. And so that company goes through a rigorous review with a board of a cross-section of staff in the Civil Rights Department going through all the activities they've indicated that they've gone through to meet the goal. And so it isn't a pro forma stamp where they say they can't meet the goal and we go, okay, that's fine, try again next time. There's a rigorous review that a company undertakes. And to your point about where we've disqualified or created an ineligible list of businesses, the Civil Rights Department regularly denies the good faith efforts of companies. One of the reasons we don't publish that here, but we have information on it, is that we look to ourselves in the Civil Rights Department as technical assistance providers, because there's been no company that has created or engaged in such an egregious disregard for the good faith efforts of the goal that we've needed to come before the council and say, can we disbar them or debar them for participating in the future? Normally, when that happens, we bring a company in and sit down with them and go through their good faith efforts to identify with them things that they could have done better, could have done differently, outreach that they could have conducted, and other things they could have engaged in, so that these companies can continue to try to do work with the city, because the goal here is not to create a situation where at some point any company that has not met a goal with the city is prevented from doing business with the city. But at this point, we have not had companies doing business with the city that have completely disregarded our value for equity, and most companies will sit down and understand this. And the companies that don't want to do what the city's requirements are for inclusion of women and minority firms, if we go through one time with them where they have totally failed on their good faith efforts, they typically never bid again, because we have given them a picture of what the expectation is for doing business in the city. And if they are unwilling to do that, they just don't bid anymore.
thank you, I appreciate that. I'll just note that one of the companies on here is Vite & Company, and it might have been my first term, I'm not sure, but it was before you were Commissioner of the Civil Rights Department. But Vite kept coming in with zeros and zeros and zeros, and they got some warning letters, and they came back with zeros, and they didn't get any contracts. They were told, you're not going to get any contracts. I believe it was just for 6 months, but they didn't. It could have been 12, I don't remember specifically. And now it's nice to see they're coming in here and they're actually not at zero anymore. So that's just, I want to acknowledge they could be higher. They're like 5 and 2.5 and 3.5 and 7% for a couple of their projects. But it's great to see that there was some progress, and maybe that did make an impression on them to have to go through that small period when they didn't get any contracts.
And Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon, we send warning letters and failure to comply letters, and you need to get your act together letters, and if you don't get your act together letters, you're not going to be doing business with the city any longer. And for the most part, companies will turn around and do what they're supposed to do. But again, for the ones that just refuse to act the way the city needs them to act in terms of including women and minority as businesses and as workforce, they don't bid. They don't come back.
Well, I just want to note that our goals are pretty high, but if we're actually going to accomplish them, we somehow need to get businesses to work with us, and we need to give all the support we can, but we have to help hold them accountable. I mean, people are really getting a lot of business with public dollars, and so I think we just need to keep working. And for me, I think as aspirational as the goals are, I think they're attainable, and we need to just develop some strategies and figure out how to do that. And I appreciate getting this update, and I'll look forward to more in the future.
Councilmember Warsame.
Thank you, Chair. Director Coppell, my question is there like an incentive program for companies that do well? Mm-hmm. So then other companies, I mean, we talked about the stick, but what about the carrot? Is there a way of, giving some sort of incentives or benefits to the companies that are doing very well, so then other companies can then just follow?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Warsame, not to sound flip about it, but in this economy, the perk is actually getting business in a municipality, because for a long time, construction wasn't happening in the private sector. Municipalities were the only place where people were actually letting construction contracts. And there were a lot of new companies that tried to come into this market because they'd never done business with the government before. And we have had to educate quite a number of businesses in that regard, that if you want to be competitive in this sector, there are some things that you have to do as a price for doing business when public money is being spent. And so that's been the incentive, is that people actually get business. On the flip side of that, though, when we're talking about some of the smaller women-owned and minority-owned firms, there are some intangibles that we talk to these companies about, because if you are in a women and minority business directory and you're eligible to participate on city business, there is an additive of the city actually helping you advertise your business by being listed in that directory, or being listed on a list and provided to a general contractor as a company that can perform in a NAICS code of services or products that we've identified the city is seeking. So there are some intangible benefits. We don't actually call them incentives, but there are certainly benefits to doing business with the city that companies don't get doing business in the private sector.
Okay, well, thank you. Any other questions? All right, Avi.
Thank you. We're going to have a presentation, hopefully.
Oh, you're going to do it the old-fashioned way?
Yes.
Okay. The PowerPoint presentation is actually linked up to our site, so do we just want to do, we'll do it this way? Okay.
Oh, you do have it?
I mean, I have it on my screen, but I mean, not on that master one, so we'll let you guys do it the old-fashioned way. I mean, it'll be a fun experience.
Here can see it, and so
before you start, though, let me just ask you really quickly, with regards to this first half report, I mean, had you seen it before?
We had seen one small part of that report dealing with the projects over $10 million and workforce participation on those projects. We'd seen that report. I was aware that the report was not posted until last week. Thursday, I believe, was the day that it was posted. It was also posted along with quarter one report, which had not been up, and that report should have been completed by the end of March. I'll get into a little bit more of our experience with workforce reports moving forward. Mr. Chair, committee members, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to present. Again, my name is Avi Vishwanathan. I'm the Hire Minnesota Campaign Director. Hire Minnesota works to ensure that public investments in job creation. I'm sorry, a little bit. This is going to take a little bit of coordination, but reduce racial disparities and lift people out of poverty. We've been around for the last 6 years working with government agencies on, various government agencies, on workforce inclusion, on publicly funded construction projects, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So specifically, what we're going to be looking for from the committee and what we want to see from this city is that the Department of Civil Rights publish monthly reports, not just quarterly reports, but monthly reports consisting of specific data that is readable, understandable, in a format that people can see on a consistent basis so we can track workforce data on these projects month to month. We also want to see conversations facilitated between the Department of Civil Rights, Hire Minnesota, who I'm representing, and contractors, facilitated by people within the city administration, whether it be the city, really the city coordinator and the mayor. We would like to see both of them involved in this process so that we can have conversations about what Councilmember Gordon was getting to earlier about solutions to meeting those goals. And I'll get into a little bit more detail about our work on that moving forward. So Hire, like I said before, has been around for several, 5-6 years now, actually, I should say. We've worked many campaigns cross-jurisdictionally, and our strategies have largely been the same. Building transparency has always been a key. With the Department of Transportation, where we began our work in 2009, we've seen a steady increase in the workforce of people of color, but the big thing that we've seen is from receiving no data from the Department of Transportation. Now we receive project reports showing the workforce data for 70 projects, and we receive those every month with consistent data where we're able to track how contractors are doing. On the green line, where we engaged for 3 years, we actively engaged in public monthly meetings that the Met Council held and created. We created tools to work with contractors so that we could look at workforce reports, both looking back at results, but also looking forward to see what workforce needed to be able to achieve the goals. And there was 19% people of color and 7% women achieved on that project versus goals of 18% people of color and 6% women. And on the Sports Facilities Authority, with the football stadium, we successfully advocated for the creation of an equity plan, which actually started in this room with the city council as they were debating the stadium. And there's only one council member up here right now who was part of that conversation, Councilmember Gordon. But that's where that came from. And we pushed to have that adopted by the Sports Facilities Authority and to use an employment assistance firm to recruit, train, and place people of color on the project working. Over 150 trainees have gone through that system so far and are available to work. I wanted to point out that while they had to leave, we had some construction students who are training who will be actually graduating next week and ready to work. They had to go back, get on their bus and go back to their school, but that's an example of the people who are impacted by this work. And as of this moment, over 38% of the hours worked on the football stadium have been worked by people of color, and over 9% have been worked by women. You know, we've been consistent, like I said, with our strategy, going to these government agencies, looking for transparency and then relationships to work. This has been cross-jurisdictional. It's been the same work based off of best practices that we've done, and it precedes the work of more than half the council and the mayor in the elections that happened last year. And we are about results. We're about equity. And we've heard the word aspiration earlier, and the mayor's chief of staff referred to these goals as aspirational not too long ago, but they're not. This is not about aspirations. It's about results. It's about getting people like the people who were here earlier into work. So moving on to the city itself. The Department of Civil Rights, as I'm sure most of you know, sitting on this committee, can move through this kind of quickly, but charged with monitoring and enforcing workforce participation goals. The hiring goals, 32% people of color, 6% women, as Director Corbell mentioned earlier, adopted in 2012. The hiring goals apply to projects of over $50,000. Now, the Department of Civil Rights itself has actually committed to monthly reports. This was published in an article in the Spokesman Recorder in July of 2013. And the website where the quarterly reports are posted, the URL actually says monthly reports. So this has been a commitment that we've seen, public commitment from the department that has not been met. And these goals, again, not an aspiration, it's an expectation. These goals are in every contract that the city has where the city is funding. It is dictated, it is stated clearly, not an aspiration, it is an expectation. So given what we've seen or heard on the workforce reports, again, the department had promised to publish monthly reports. Over the last 5 years, we've only seen 10 reports. Director Corbell talked about data through the first half of 2013. I believe the 2013 reports are actually only the first and the fourth quarters that are listed publicly right now. That's only 2 reports a year, that 10 in the last 5. We've been consistently asking for quarter reports, and again, we've discussed, monthly reports, and we saw earlier and discussed how there's only 2 reports in 2014. I want to point out that in the same time frame, we've had 9 reports from the Sports Facilities Authority on the data for the football stadium. Over the last 5 years, we've seen, or 3 years on the Met Council project, there were over 30 reports. On the Department of Transportation, in the last 5 years, we've had over 50 reports, including 7 reports in 2014 showing 70 projects worth of data. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the current reports. Councilmember, Mr. Chair, this is what we had seen prior to the reports. This is data that's included in the quarterly report showing the workforce inclusion for projects over $10 million on contracts held by the city. In this report, you can see, first of all, it's only 6 projects out of the 55 odd projects that are currently being monitored that are active by the city. It shows the total project hours worked, minority hours, minority percentage, and then the same for female, which is great. That's data that we want to see. Missing from this is also the percentage complete on a project, and also missing from this is that this is not the format that previous reports were put in. So we want to see a consistent format. If we can go to the next slide. This is a slide showing a report from the Sports Facilities Authority. It's a little hard to read, small numbers, but what this does is actually shows each contractor working on the stadium, then their subcontractors, then it shows the same data we saw before, total hours worked by people of color, hours worked by women, cumulative through that date, and then also the last month's data. So you can look at multiple trend lines with the way that this data is created. You can see where it's moving overall, you can see what month-to-month data is, getting a better idea of how the project is moving forward. Now, the next one is very similar to what we saw in the quarterly report from the city, but the key on this is a Met Council report interim, I think it was April 2012, in the middle of the Green Line construction. The big thing on this project, on this chart, is actually because we had month-to-month data, under the minority and women percentages, you see those red numbers, those show the change. And so you can measure trend lines in how the percentages are moving. Because you see consistent data, you get a better understanding of what is actually happening and how it's happening. So what's the big deal? The city has, obviously you all know, enormous disparities in employment, the disparities between black and white workers, between Native American and white workers. Well, one of the big things that's going on here right now is that the city is spending a lot of money on construction projects. The Civil Rights Department is monitoring over $620 million worth of construction projects. That's more public money than is being spent on the Viking Stadium. And by the way, that 38% people of color on the football stadium has translated so far to this point about $3.5 million worth of wages going to people of color working on that project. And I also wanted to point out too, I should have pointed out with the Sports Facilities Authority data that the Sports Facilities Authority on the Viking Stadium actually uses the city of Minneapolis's data system. The city of Minneapolis does not participate in the use of that. The Sports Facilities Authority puts in their own data, pulls their own reports, but it is the same data system, and we've seen a lot of detailed data from the Sports Facilities Authority when we've requested it. There's been zip code data, there's been data broken down by ethnicity through certain dates. They are able to pull that data fairly effectively. So then moving forward, again, construction jobs are a bright spot in job growth. We're seeing a lot of development across the region. This is creating an opportunity to reduce racial disparities by training new workers, as I discussed with the employment assistance firm. The 32%, I just want to say too, again, not an aspiration. It is a tool. It is a means to the end. It's an imperative as well. In a city with over 40% people of color, 32% is not some pie in the sky goal. It's what you need to be able to keep moving forward. I also want to point out something about the football stadium. We've heard a lot of people talk about how that is sucking up employment. It is taking a lot of people of color from other projects and moving them into that space. But when the city council, again, I know it was divided 7-6, but when the city council passed the Viking Stadium, there's also a lot of discussion about equity, and there was actually a unanimous vote on the equity plan that same day. So if we're going to talk about, I mean, the city set out that that was going to be a priority. The stadium was going to be the opportunity to create jobs for people of color, even though there was division among whether or not we should fund it and those other issues. And so if we now just talk about the stadium taking up all of these jobs and sucking people into it, we're just admiring a problem or making an excuse. We're not actually taking action to do the things that we have committed to do. I mentioned the mayor's chief of staff earlier in this discussion of the best we can do. We're doing all we can do. 32% is an aspiration. But the people who were here earlier, I think some of them had signs. I aspire for a career. I aspire to support my family. They're not actually just aspirational for them. They're a necessity, and they're out there seizing their opportunity to go to training, to learn skills, to be able to get a job. And so we owe them that opportunity and seizing that opportunity ourselves. So what do? Where do we go? Transparency, again, has been a main theme for us. The city must fulfill its commitment to publishing monthly workforce reports in a public manner so that everyone can see it, look at the data, and have that proper format, that same way that we've described, consistent so everybody can understand. And people in the communities impacted will be able to see what is actually happening in their communities based off of these workforce reports. Now, transparency it's been key to all of our success and all of the successes around equity and construction workforce that we've seen in this region. Now, earlier I also mentioned the facilitated meetings with contractors. So this is based off of something that we've had success on with the Department of Transportation. Recently, because of our monthly workforce reports and our comprehensive data, we were able to identify a particular contractor, similar to how Councilmember Gordon was discussing Vite earlier. We were able to identify a particular contractor who is well short of hiring goals on all of their projects. 5 projects, over $70 million worth of construction that they were doing, and they were not even close to hiring goals. And so the Department of Transportation facilitated a meeting between Hire Minnesota, the contractor, and the Commissioner of Transportation, between their Office of Civil Rights, Hire Minnesota, and the contractors to discuss ways for them to increase their participation. So instead of just having this compliance drill, we actually met with the contractors and talked about workforce projections. Show us what your workforce needs are going to be over the next year. Show us on all of those projects. Let's analyze where your gaps are in people of color and look at what we need to do to be able to fill those gaps and meet a goal. And we're currently in the process, had several meetings with them. The contractor, in case you're wondering, is CS McCrossin, mainly doing road construction. We've started helping them develop partnerships with training institutions so that when they identify those gaps, they will get people trained in those skills. And so the training institution's curriculum actually looks at and relates to what the company actually needs. So it's a two-way street on that one. They're going to be hiring internal staff that will help manage all of their diversity issues. And then they're going to be working with their subcontractors to do the workforce projections and to ensure that they're also meeting the goals for people of color. And this is really based off of transparency, being able to do this, but it also helps build relationships so that we are working with the contractors, the city's working with us, the city is working with the contractors, and we're all sharing tools and resources. That's a significant part of what we're going to have to do to be able to increase workforce of people of color. So lastly, I'm just going back to what I had mentioned earlier as action steps that we want to see. We need monthly workforce reports. We need to be able to track that data and then use that to identify contractors who are not meeting hiring goals or falling well short, and then working to facilitate and share resources so that we can have that continuing dialogue. Compliance drills and working through good faith efforts are not sufficient. We need to have new tactics. The current efforts are yielding the current results. That's something that we say a lot at Hire. And what we've presented here is a new way of building relationships and handling this work that will actually create successes because we've seen it happen before. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, since I don't see anybody with their things up, I'm going to ask some questions first. So, in our current system, we have these hiring goals and a contractor doesn't meet the hiring goals. I mean, what happens to them?
From our perspective, depends on the government agency. So sometimes the state is an example that we can use where they automatically produce a letter, send it to the contractor looks at it. We think that there might be conversations happening behind the scenes that we're not aware of. And then hopefully in the next year you see workforce data going up, or workforce numbers going up. There's a whole lot of we don't know what's happening in that process too, and that's a problem in the community. But sometimes we don't know. I mean, workforce data doesn't go up, right? And numbers don't go up. And then in those instances, we continue to push on government agencies to get answers. And then if we're pushed to the point where there are no answers, then we're showing up at a work site and asking the contractor what's going on right in front of them.
So but let me ask you this way. I mean, from your vantage point, what happens here at the city of Minneapolis when a contractor doesn't meet their hiring goals?
I do not know. And we don't see enough data to know when a contractor isn't meeting their hiring goals. And I mean, just essentially anecdotally, I don't know of any process that happens. When Director Corbell highlighted that process, that was largely news to me.
Okay. When you talked about having monthly reports, I mean, that's what it says on the website, you said, right?
That's what the URL is titled. It says monthly reports right up at the top. And I can send a link, but the spokesman recorder had an article, I believe it was actually July 3rd or 4th of 2013. That's the first sentence in that article.
Okay. And, I mean, you highlighted the part about being aspirational versus being an expectation. And, I tend to agree with you. I mean, if we're talking about aspirational, we might as well just not do it because, I mean, folks are going to comply or not comply. It doesn't really matter. I mean, there's no penalty for it. And, the expectation part, I mean, there has to be some sort of penalty for people not meeting those goals or, I mean, why have those goals? And so my question to you with regards to that is that, I mean, are there any state laws or, local ordinances that speak to that, whether they're aspirational or whether they're expectations or whether they're mandated?
I am not aware of any statute or ordinance that uses the word aspirational. There is the concept of good faith efforts, but Commissioner Lindsay, the Department of Human Rights Commissioner who established these goals, he has the authority in state statute to create the goals for state projects. He always says essentially that even meeting the goal, I mean, it's not just the paper drill for good faith efforts is not sufficient. You need to be doing more, and you need to be thinking beyond just the system, how to impact the system.
And you talked a little bit earlier about how there's this narrative in the community about how the Viking Stadium is sucking up all the minorities and women, I guess, potential employees. And, I mean, you don't believe that, right? I mean, that's what I heard from you, right?
There's no way to know that unless we see data across systems, to be perfectly honest. If we're not seeing data and we don't have fully transparent systems, then there's no way to verify that. I can say that even if the Viking Stadium is taking workers from other projects, there are still available workers who are not being hired to work on those other projects.
Okay. And let me ask you this. I mean, so with Hire Minnesota, I mean, you guys don't have your own database for figuring out these data points or, figuring out, what to do in terms of, where the job market is, where the employees are and those sorts of things. I mean, in some ways you're relying on government entities to provide you with that data. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The one thing that we do have that I would like to go back to on that workforce projection tool is that actually was developed by Hire Minnesota. But that does require data input from contractors or government agencies to be able to be useful. So we are reliant on data from the agencies.
Okay. And, one of the points that you made was, having these consistent monthly reports. And I guess, I mean, if we were to have this, I mean, how does it become easier for you to do your job? Or can it become easier for you to do your job?
It will absolutely become easier for me to do my job and for Hire to do what it does. The main piece out of that is really looking at which contractors are consistently failing to meet goals, which contractors, it's also good to know which contractors are meeting goals, but which contractors are getting lots of projects and failing to do what we look at as an imperative. And then we can approach those contractors and, with those meetings and with those tools. We really want to see something like a workforce projection tool become an industry standard.
Okay. Council members, any other questions? Councilmember Gordon?
I don't know if this is necessarily a question. It was maybe just a comment. You can stay standing there, but I don't need to make you stay standing long. But it had to do with the goals and the approval of the goals. And I remember when we did it in 2012, and there was actually an analysis that was done of the workforce, available workforce, people in apprenticeship projects, and they were approved following the state goals that were set and with an understanding that this is something we could potentially achieve and accomplish and attain based on the data that we looked at to analyze them, which was probably similar data that the Human Rights Commissioner from the state used to also reach those goals. So and they are approved by the council. And I think even if you go on the city's website, it says their goals that people who get contracts are expected to attain. I mean, all that said, I think we always know that we sometimes set goals and it's hard to reach them and we have to work hard. And so, but I just want to, the council approved them as goals and there's an expectation that they'll be met. And that's how we will award contracts to those contractors who I think even based on a pre-assessment, have a good chance of reaching those goals within their projects. So I think that's significant. I guess the only question I had was for Civil Rights Commissioner about the monthly reports. And I go to the website and it just says reports. It could have been changed, and then I find a list of quarterly reports. So whatever. I don't want to argue about how we set up our website or what our expectations were, but I do wonder about would it be possible for us to do monthly reports, and would it be possible for us to include all the information similar to, I think it was the Met Council's reports, I think, which had more fields than ours did. And so maybe if Commissioner Corbel could just let us know. I mean, you're requesting a staff direction here, and I'm just wondering, is that a reasonable request and something that we could accomplish, or would it be easier? Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Gordon, I want to make 2 points. When the City Council adopted the goals set by the State Human Rights Department in 2012, the discussion that the municipalities had with the state of Minnesota at that time was that we knew that because we were moving from an 11% minority goal to move to 32% was going to be a significant increase. And that even though there were contracts and projects that were meeting goals at around 17 or 18%, we knew that the 32% was going to be a significant increase across the board for all projects and all municipalities, because the fact of the matter is the workforce did not exist. So the 32% minority goal has done something. It has forced contractors and municipalities to look at increasing the workforce in general and not be reliant on moving the same bodies from job to job to job to maintain the 11% that was the previous goal, and at best case, the 17 or 18% that was used that some projects were experiencing. So my conversations with the State Human Rights Commissioner most recently is not that the 32% is something that that we should see as a failure for municipalities that aren't consistently meeting 32% on every project, but it is because we knew that the 32% was going to take some time to get there because we were so far away from it in 2012 when that goal was adopted. So I just want to make that clear. Now, in terms of whether or not the website, I don't know what Mr. Vishwanathan saw, but the website that in the Civil Rights Department that I run has always talked about quarterly reports. And I will certainly throw myself on the sword at this point that 2013 was a tough year. As you know, we had an acting division director in that unit. We had some staff shortages. So reporting was probably a lower priority than just getting the compliance work done. But we've since caught that up and are on track for 2014. Can the Civil Rights Department do a monthly report similar to what was done on the Green Line and what is being done on the Viking Stadium? And I would just put this to the committee at this time. The Viking Stadium is reporting on one project. The Green Line was reporting on one project. the city civil rights department is reporting on and monitoring compliance on multiple projects all at the same time. And whether that project is a $5 million project or a $10 million project, there are a significant number of moving parts just in the compliance work itself. And as I've reported previously, the technology that we use in this city to track business goals and to track the workforce numbers is not what it could be in order for us to do the kind of reporting that Mr. Vishwanathan has asked for on a monthly basis. Can we do it on a quarterly basis? Can we create some type of template that we can just drop the numbers in, where we can cut some days out of the process? That is absolutely possible to do, and the staff in the contract compliance department is working on doing that as we speak. But I can't sit here and promise that a monthly report is going to happen with any less lag time than the quarterly report is currently taking. And what it is going to do is to create the Civil Rights Department generating what I think could be a less accurate, less useful piece of data than if we are currently reporting the way we are on a quarterly basis.
So, Ms. Corbell, I mean, you did admit, though, I mean, you within your department should be reporting quarterly, and that we've not been receiving that very well. And so, I mean, my thing is, I mean, in the future, at least, like, you know, we should be expecting the quarterly reports quarterly. And so, you know, with your timeline, I mean, I'm imagining, you know, 60 days after, you know, a quarter ends, I mean, we should have a report for the, you know, committee. And I mean, we have not been receiving that regularly. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, you are correct in putting forward that the 2013 reports were not up on the website, and that we did some combination reports in 2013. The final report in 2014 for the 2013 report came out in February, I believe, and that report was a compilation of the closed projects for that entire period. In 2014, that has not been the case. We have done a first quarter report and a second quarter report. And I have... So
let me ask you, the first quarter report for 2014, was it released on time? Because, I mean, what I'm receiving is the first half report, but I mean, the first quarter report, I mean, we did not receive that, did we?
Mr. Chair, I'm explaining to you what happened with both the reports in 2014. And when you asked me when the report, the quarterly reports for first quarter and second quarter, the compilation of the activity is in the second quarter report. But because we are required to have a quarterly report for each quarter, I asked staff to break out the first and second quarter reports and to update the website with a first quarter report and a second quarter report. But if you look at the second quarter report, all of the activity for the first 6 months is included in that, if you look at those two bottom graphics.
Right, but I mean, the first quarter report was not released on time, and the first quarter report was released with the second quarter report. I mean, that's my understanding of what happened.
Mr. Chair, I believe that's what I just explained, yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon, anything else?
I don't think so, and we probably don't need as staff direction, because it sounds like we're already pursuing maybe adding some more items into the report in terms of what we see before us on the screen. And I think also we're hearing a commitment to make sure to get on track with our quarterly reports, so we can expect one every quarter. I did want to make sort of a side comment. I was feeling bad that I was picking on Flannery Construction, even though they achieved 0 in their subcontracting goals. Their actual hiring of minority and women accomplishments were a little bit better. So please read the full report before you take that as some big media story or anything else.
Mr. Vishwanathan, I have a question for you. So if our quarterly reports were actually on time, would that be sufficient in terms of satisfying maybe your need for monthly reports, or would you want to go further with that?
Let me first.
I mean, I kind of know the answer already, but I mean, I'm just saying, like, would that be satisfactory? Just because, I mean, currently we're not receiving our quarterly reports on time.
Given the amount of time left in 2014, if the third quarter report were to come out and then the fourth quarter report at the beginning of next year, I think then those two, working through that process in a timely manner, I will say this, that would suffice given that there's not much time left in 2014.
Right,
But moving into
what I'm
next
saying
year,
is going forward, I mean, how can we do it better? How can we make it so that it's easier on your job to get that information from us?
I think that monthly reports are really what we need to be able to make that happen. I think that one of the key points on this too is that the quarter reports there's a great deal of narrative. And there's a lot of discussion in there. That doesn't need to be the case on a monthly basis. The first quarter report also, I believe it's the first quarter, but definitely previous year's reports, has a much larger list of construction projects than the second quarter report had. So it's clearly doable to pull a list of that many projects. And yes, the Green Line is one project and the Viking Stadium is one construction project, but the Department of Transportation gets us 70 projects each month. Now, it's doable. It's clearly doable. Given the rest of the year, I understand where we are, but monthly reports are really what's going to be needed to be able to look at this data on a consistent basis. You can't look at 3 months worth of data and then go back and say, you can't fix problems that fast if you're only looking at data every 3 months.
Right, and I mean, essentially, whenever we have a report out, it's going to be maybe, for the 3 months, but it's going to be about 60 days late anyways, right? Because we're not, with that lag time and all that stuff, I understand that, but it's still going to be, let's say if the first quarter is from January to March, we're not going to get a report until probably about May at the earliest, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And, we'll, to use a term from my old profession, we'll take this under advisement, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee.
Council members, any other questions? I don't see anybody. All right, well, Councilmember Gordon.
I just had an idea that maybe the monthly reports at this point could be aspirational, and we could explore the idea of how we might get there once we see that we can get some quarterly information. And maybe there's some data that we have that we can make available more frequently.
I hear you on that, and I will just echo what I said a little bit earlier, which is that I think if we make things aspirational, they won't happen. So, but thank you though, and we will, have conversations about this. But I will move to receive and file both reports today. Any discussions? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Thank you to council members. Thank you to the community members that showed up. I really appreciate everyone showing up today. With nothing else on our agenda, I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you.